So, if you wanted to design the ultimate dangerous rock star rebel, you probably wouldn't start with a pathologically shy kid.
Right, definitely not the typical blueprint.
Exactly. I mean, a kid who addressed everyone as sir and ma'am. And get this, he actually managed to get a C in his 8th grade music class.
Which is just wild to think about now.
It really is. But, when we look at the birth of rock and roll, the standard blueprint just kind of goes out the window. History usually feels, I don't know, neat and tidy, like a controlled demolition where someone planned it and just pushed a button.
Yeah, but the rise of Elvis Presley wasn't a controlled demolition at all.
No, it was more like musical alchemy. Just a kid playing with incredibly volatile elements in the dark until something accidentally caught fire.
And today's deep dive is pulling from a really comprehensive encyclopedia article that covers the life, the artistry, and the massive and often highly debated cultural legacy of the king of rock and roll. And what the source material reveals is that the alchemy you just mentioned wasn't, an overnight accident.
Yeah.
It was the result of years of really quiet, obsessive observation.
Which is exactly our mission today. We are looking past the rhinestone jumpsuits, past the velvet paintings and the caricatures to understand the actual mechanics of that alchemy.
Right, what actually created this icon.
Exactly. And what his journey reveals about fame and American pop culture. So whether you are a lifelong Elvis superfan who knows every single B-side or someone who just knows his name from a movie, we're going to break down those aha moments of his career. The moments that permanently changed the DNA of the music you listen to today.
To understand how he changed music, we really have to start with the specific mechanics of the music that changed him. Because before he was a king, he was basically a sponge.
A total sponge.
Yeah. Born in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later moving to Memphis, he was famously introverted. I mean, his music teacher literally told him he had no aptitude for singing.
I always laugh at that detail. The teacher hears this kid and thinks, yeah, no talent here.
Total misjudgment.
Right. Meanwhile, outside of that classroom, he's building this encyclopedic musical vocabulary. He was absorbing absolutely everything.
Oh, absolutely. First, you have the Assembly of God Church.
Right, where he's sitting in the pews.
Yeah, witnessing these highly emotive, really physical performances of gospel singers. The source notes how he internalized not just the sound, but the intense emotional connection.
The way they moved, right?
Exactly. The way the singers moved, the way the congregation reacted. He saw that music wasn't just auditory, it was this physical, spiritual release.
And then you add the geography of Memphis to that equation, specifically Beale Street.
Oh yeah, Beale Street was huge for him.
He's a teenager just admiring the incredibly flashy, vibrant clothes at Lansky Brothers, which was a style very closely associated with the African-American community at the time.
Right. And simultaneously, he's constantly listening to WDIA radio.
The race record station.
Yeah, that's what they called them back then. Blues, rhythm and blues, spirituals. He was soaking all of this up without any prejudice at all. He was crossing those cultural lines in his head long before he ever did it on a stage.
It makes me think of a modern-day music producer who has one of those algorithm-breaking streaming playlists, you know the type?
Oh, for sure.
Where they pull a little hillbilly country here, a little gospel there, some heavy R&B, and they just smash it all together in a sound mixing program to create a completely new synthesized genre.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Elvis was basically doing that mixing in his head in the early 1950s.
He really was. And the depth of that internal mixing, it often gets overlooked.
All right.
Later in his career, professional seasoned songwriters, guys like Leiber and Stoller, they were genuinely shocked by his musical vocabulary.
Wait, really? Because you'd think they would just see him as a performer.
Exactly. They assumed he was just some kid with a good voice. But they found he had this profound understanding of the blues and gospel traditions. He didn't just mimic the sounds he heard on the radio. He intuitively grasped the underlying architecture of the music.
So we have this teenager walking around Memphis with a massive genre-bending internal playlist, but translating that into a physical record, I mean, that was almost a total failure.
Yeah, the initial attempts were pretty rough.
He goes into Sun Records, and Sam Phillips, the owner, is famously looking for a very specific mechanism, right? A white singer who possessed the sound and the emotional feel of black musicians.
Right, but Elvis originally bombed multiple vocal auditions.
He just couldn't nail it at first.
No, he couldn't. The real breakthrough didn't happen until July 5, 1954, and it was born out of sheer frustration. The session was just going nowhere.
So it's late at night, and they're essentially packing up to go home.
Yeah. Elvis, along with his guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, they just start goofing off to blow off steam. Elvis launches into this frantic, up-tempo version of an old Arthur Crudup blues number. It's hard.
He was literally just acting the fool. But let's pause and explain the musical mechanics of what he was actually doing in that moment.
Yeah, it's really important.
He took the driving, steady rhythm of hillbilly country and just slammed it headfirst into the raw, syncopated chord progressions of Delta blues. He sped it up. He gave it this nervous, bouncing energy.
And that is the exact mechanism of rockabilly.
Exactly. And Sam Phillips hears that collision of styles from the control room and realizes, like, oh, wow, this is the sound I've been looking for. He hits record.
And thank God he did. A few days later, local DJ Dewey Phillips plays it on the radio. And the listener response was so overwhelming, he just kept putting the needle back to the start of the record, playing it repeatedly for the rest of his broadcast.
And the source highlights a fascinating detail about that radio debut. Dewey Phillips actually interviewed Elvis on air that night, and he specifically asked Elvis what high school he went to.
Right, which seems like a weird question.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't care about the kid's education. He asked that question to signal to the audience that Elvis was white. Because the callers flooding the station assumed, based entirely on the sound and the rhythm, that he was black.
That single question perfectly illustrates the rigid racial segregation of the 1950s South and how radically this new sound was dismantling those barriers.
Yeah, it was revolutionary.
But the audio was only half the equation, right?
Hmm.
The visual translation of that sound came next. When they started performing live, like at his early gig at the Overton Park Shell, his stage presence was actually born out of pure, unadulterated stage fright.
Oh my gosh, the rubber legs.
Yes. His legs started shaking uncontrollably.
And he was wearing these wide-cut, baggy pants that just emphasized the shaking. He realized that every time his leg twitched, the girls in the audience would just scream.
Right, they went crazy for it.
So he took that nervous energy and weaponized it. But I want to push back on the narrative for a second here.
Sure, go ahead.
If this rockabilly sound was already brewing in the South, I mean, you had brilliant folks like Carl Perkins doing something very similar with country and blues. What was the specific magic that made Elvis the one to ignite a global explosion?
That's a fair question. Carl Perkins was undeniably a pioneer, but his roots remained much more strictly tied to country music. Elvis, on the other hand, was the complete, undeniable package.
The total package.
Yeah, he brought that visual element you just described, combined with his intense sexual charisma and an incredibly broad, almost operatic vocal range. He didn't just sing the notes, he delivered an emotional grandeur and a rebellious energy. It perfectly encapsulated what the emerging youth culture was feeling, but hadn't yet been able to articulate.
And that visual package, that weaponized nervous energy, is exactly what thrilled the teenagers and absolutely terrified the establishment.
Terrified's the right word.
Yeah. By late 1955, RCA Victor buys his contract from Sun Records for an unprecedented $40,000. He drops his debut album, and if you look at the cover, it's a statement of intent.
Oh, absolutely.
He's not sitting statically at a piano like the crooners before him. He's holding an acoustic guitar, head thrown back, mouth wide open. He fundamentally positioned the guitar as the ultimate instrument of rock and roll.
The guitar became a physical extension of his body. It freed the frontman to use the instrument as a rhythmic prop. That visual shift signaled action and rebellion.
Totally.
And that brings us to his television appearances in 1956, which is where the culture war really detonates in living rooms across America.
It is wild to read about the absolute panic he caused. He goes on the Milton Berle show and does this slow, grinding, halftime version of Hound Dog.
Oh yeah, that performance was infamous.
He's moving his hips, he's smirking, and the establishment just loses its collective mind. The media literally calls him unfit for family viewing.
So what does the TV industry do? They try to control the mechanism.
Right.
The Steve Allen Show books him, but they force him to wear a formal tuxedo and sing Hound Dog to an actual, literal basset hound wearing a top hat.
This is just so insulting.
It was a deliberate, calculated attempt by network executives to humiliate him and strip away the danger. They wanted to turn the rebellion into a harmless joke.
And even Ed Sullivan tried to control him.
Right. Sullivan originally vowed he would never, ever allow Elvis on his program, but eventually caved to the ratings. But during Elvis's third appearance, the network infamously ordered the cameras to shoot him only from the waist up. They were terrified of broadcasting his pelvic gyrations to middle America.
But the backlash wasn't just coming from TV networks either. You had the old guard of the music industry attacking him. I mean, Frank Sinatra publicly called rock and roll a rancid-smelling aphrodisiac sung by cretinous goons.
Ouch.
Yeah, tell us how you really feel, Frank. There was even an FBI file opened, noting a warning from a Catholic diocese in Wisconsin claiming Elvis roused the sexual passions of teenaged youth.
The moral panic was real.
So, looking at the source text, how did Elvis actually internalize this massive culture war? Did he, lean into being the bad boy, or did he secretly want to be accepted by the mainstream?
Well, the paradox of Elvis is that he wasn't a calculated, cynical rebel at all. The source text reveals a remarkably polite, deferential young man.
Really?
Yeah. When reporters asked him about Sinatra's harsh comments, Elvis didn't fire back. He actually defended Sinatra, saying he had the right to his opinion and acknowledging him as a great success.
Wow, that's incredibly mature for a guy in his early 20s.
It is. And before that humiliating Steve Allen show appearance, Elvis told a reporter he didn't want to do anything to make people dislike him. He genuinely struggled to understand why his music would make anyone rebel against their parents.
So the rebellion was entirely projected onto him by a culture that was terrified of change. He was just playing the music he loved, the way he felt it, which makes the next phase of his life so intensely tragic. Just as this controversy peaks and he becomes the biggest star on the planet, he gets drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958. Talk about the ultimate mechanism of taming a rebel.
The draft completely severed his momentum. He serves in Germany, which introduces three major life-altering elements into his orbit. First, he meets a 14-year-old Priscilla Bewley.
Right.
Second, he discovers amphetamines. They were routinely given to soldiers to help them stay awake on night watch, introducing him to the idea of using medication for functional performance.
That's a detail that really foreshadows a lot.
It does. And third, he begins his lifelong obsession with karate.
But the most devastating event happens just before he deploys, doesn't it? His mother, Gladys, dies.
Yeah. The source material emphasizes how incredibly close they were. Her death just shattered him. Associates noted that he was never the same person after that loss. A piece of his foundational grounding was permanently gone.
And when he returns from the Army, he's vulnerable. And his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, fully capitalizes on a more docile Elvis.
Parker pivots him completely away from the raw danger of rockabilly and steers him into the era of the Presley pictures.
Ah, the movies.
Yeah. He spends the vast majority of the 1960s churning out highly profitable but critically embarrassing musical comedies.
I always hear people describe this era as Elvis being trapped in a golden cage, but based on these sources, that feels, I don't know, too passive. It wasn't a cage, it was an industrial assembly line, and Elvis was just the hood ornament.
That's a very accurate way to look at it.
The movies were entirely formulaic. The soundtracks grew progressively worse, often written on order by Hollywood songwriters who didn't even understand the mechanics of rock and roll. They were just filling quotas.
And Elvis felt deeply humiliated by the material. The encyclopedic music fan we discussed earlier, the guy who intuitively understood gospel and blues, was now being forced to sing to animals and babies on film.
It's just depressing.
It was. He would often retreat from the microphone in the recording studio, frustrated and demoralized because he simply couldn't believe in the music he was being forced to produce.
So he is making money hand over fist, but artistically he is starving to death. And that brings us to 1968. If the movies were the assembly line, the 68 comeback special was him throwing a massive wrench into the gears.
Oh, totally. Colonel Parker's original vision for that television special was exactly what you'd expect. A tame, family-friendly Christmas program with Elvis in a tuxedo singing carols.
Just going back to the Steve Allen well again.
Exactly. But Elvis had reached his absolute breaking point. He aligned himself with a young, visionary director named Steve Binder to completely defy the Colonel's wishes.
They stripped away all the Hollywood gloss. The defining image of that special is Elvis, dressed head to toe in tight black leather, sitting in a circle with a live band, including his original guitarist, Scotty Moore, and just letting loose.
Yes.
He's sweating, he's snarling. The mechanism of that show was brilliant. It was him grabbing the microphone, essentially reminding the world, this is who I actually am. He reclaimed his raw, predatory roots.
And it was a massive, critical and commercial success. It reminded the public, and perhaps more importantly, it reminded Elvis himself of the visceral power he commanded. He wasn't a joke. He was a ferocious, unparalleled live performer.
But the cruel irony of that prison break is that his success just led him straight into a brand new, even more grueling confinement.
The Las Vegas residency.
Exactly. The Vegas residency and the relentless touring machine of the 1970s.
Initially, his return to live shows at the International Hotel in Vegas was spectacular. He didn't just play Vegas, he reinvented the concept of the Vegas residency.
He brought in a massive backing band, right?
Yeah, a huge band. He incorporated his karate movements into his stage choreography and wore those elaborate jumpsuits. It culminated in massive highs, like the 1973 Aloha from Hawaii special.
Which made history, right?
It did. It was the first global satellite broadcast by a solo artist.
But the lows, I mean, the physical and mental toll outlined in the text is just brutal. He is locked into a schedule of doing 168 concerts a year.
That's practically a show every other day when you
Yeah.
factor in travel.
It's insane. His marriage breaks down. He becomes increasingly isolated in his penthouse suites, dealing with paranoia. And then there is the medical crisis.
The polypharmacy.
Right. And I want to pause here because modern culture so often treats the quote-unquote bloated Vegas Elvis as a cheap punchline. But looking at the actual data in these sources, the tragedy of his isolation is profound.
It's heartbreaking.
He was a man crushed by the weight of his own myth, surrounded by a payroll of enablers who simply would not or could not say no to him.
The scale of the drug use is staggering. His primary physician, Dr. George Nichopoulos, prescribed over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics in just the first 8 months of 1977 alone.
10,000 doses in 8 months. That's terrifying.
And the mechanism of his addiction was functional. He needed uppers to perform with the energy the crowds demanded, and he needed downers to force his body to sleep after the adrenaline in the shows.
Right, he wasn't doing this for recreation.
No, and because the pills came from a doctor's prescription pad, Elvis rationalized that he wasn't a street addict. He was desperately trying to medicate the physical pain of his grueling schedule and the immense mental anguish of his isolation.
The machine just kept running at top speed until the engine completely gave out. He died in August 1977 at just 42 years old.
Much too young.
And even in death, the machinery around him tried to control the narrative. The local medical examiner, Jerry Francisco, immediately called a press conference to claim drugs played absolutely no role in his death before the toxicology reports had even been completed.
It was a blatant cover-up attempting to protect the brand. When the actual lab reports eventually came back, they showed 14 different drugs in his system, 10 of them in significant quantities.
Let's just sit with that for a second. The kid who was so shy he could barely sing in music class, dying alone, medicated into oblivion just to keep a multi-million-dollar touring apparatus afloat. It's a heavy, deeply sad reality behind the rhinestones.
It is. And to fully understand his impact, the source material requires us to look past the tragedy of his final years and examine the complex, often highly debated cultural blueprint he left behind.
We have to talk about his legacy.
Right. And you cannot comprehensively discuss Elvis Presley's legacy without discussing race in America.
The text makes it very clear that his relationship with the African-American community was and remains highly scrutinized.
Yes, it's very complex.
On one hand, during his early stardom, he openly defied the segregation norms of the time. He would attend colored night at the local Memphis amusement park. He constantly publicly credited black artists for his style. He openly stated to the press that rock and roll was essentially rhythm and blues and gospel music, just reaching a wider audience.
But the sources also cover the controversies. There was a very persistent, though totally false, rumor started by Sepia magazine in 1957. It claimed Elvis had said the only thing black people could do for him was shine his shoes.
And the way he handled that is really revealing. He didn't just send out a PR statement.
No, he didn't.
He granted a specific interview to Jet magazine, a major African-American publication, to vehemently deny the rumor directly to that community. He stated he would never say anything like that, and he explicitly acknowledged his musical limitations compared to his heroes. He famously told them, "I can't sing like Fats Domino can."
The debate over his legacy certainly continues today, and the source text balances both perspectives. Some critics argue he appropriated black music, using his race to achieve immense commercial success and a cultural dominance that was systemically denied to his black peers.
Right, which is a very valid critique.
Conversely, the text points out that prominent black artists of his era, like Jackie Wilson and Al Green, fiercely defended Elvis. They argued that his massive popularity forced the integration of the music industry and opened doors for black artists that had previously been nailed shut.
It's a debate about appropriation versus integration that we are still having in pop culture today, and Elvis is basically patient zero for that conversation.
He really is.
He also left an enduring legacy in how we define masculinity. I mean, he was doing something completely subversive for the 1950s.
How do you mean?
Well, on one hand, he was this tough, working class, former truck driver. But on the other hand, he was wearing heavy eye makeup, crying emotionally on stage, and wearing lace shirts. He completely scrambled the era's rigid rules for how a man was supposed to present himself.
That fusion of styles, not just musically with country, blues, and gospel, but visually with masculinity and vulnerability, permanently shifted American pop culture.
Yeah.
He created the template for the modern rock star.
So as you're listening to all of this, why do you think we are still so obsessed with him? Is it because his life represents the ultimate realization of the American dream? A desperately poor kid from Tupelo becoming a literal global king?
Or do we obsess over him because he is the ultimate American cautionary tale of what happens when that dream consumes you whole? Synthesizing all the sources we've discussed today, he was undeniably both. Elvis Presley was an unprecedented cultural lightning rod. His unique, intuitive ability to absorb, interpret, and perform diverse musical traditions didn't just create a string of hits, it laid the entire blueprint for modern celebrity, youth culture, and the very concept of the rock star.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something from the text that genuinely surprised me. We talked about how Elvis couldn't read sheet music,
Right, he played entirely by ear.
but he was far from just a puppet in the studio. He often played piano and acoustic guitar on his own tracks. He crafted his own complex, multi-part vocal arrangements, specifically on his Grammy-winning gospel tracks like How Great Thou Art.
Even pushed to co-write a few songs like You'll Be Gone.
Yeah, his musicality and his ear for arrangement were far deeper than the historical narrative usually gives him credit for. He wasn't just a voice waiting for instructions. He was a producer and arranger in his own right.
Which is pretty incredible when you think about it.
It is. So think about that untapped potential. Imagine what Elvis Presley could have created in the 1970s and beyond if he had been allowed to be a fully liberated artist.
What if he had fired Colonel Tom Parker?
Right. What if he stopped the grueling Vegas tours and just locked himself in a studio? If he was writing, arranging, and producing his own music? What if that musical alchemy we talked about at the very beginning hadn't been bottled up, commodified, and sold on an assembly line, but was allowed to keep experimenting in the lab?
It really completely changes how you view his entire catalog.
It does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep listening, keep questioning, and we'll catch you next time.